There's only one event in an NHL offseason anymore that triggers talks about whether or not your team is tough enough. And that is when somebody invariably signs Ryan Reeves. Well, the Maple Leafs did that a little while ago, and otherwise haven't heard a single thing about it, have we? Good morning to you. Good Thursday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports, and this is Daily Shot of Penguins. It comes your way bright and early every weekday if you're into football and or baseball. I also offer daily shots of Steelers and Pirates that I hope you'll check out as well. It's not exactly some bold, hot take on my part to inform you that the Penguins aren't any tougher for the coming season than they were for the past season. This roster added almost no toughness, at least not by the traditional measurement of such a thing. There's not anyone at all who would be, going after anybody to drop gloves or to protect Sid and Gino or any of that sort of thing. There's just nothing. There's just nothing. The players they added don't fit that mold at all. Doesn't mean that they can't the rest of the way. Doesn't mean that they won't. Kyle Dubas, when he was in Toronto, did employ the occasional tougher guy. And he did place some value on guys who played not necessarily as the old school enforcer role, but as more of the real pain in the rear end types that an opponent would have to face. But when you look at the free agents who've been added, you're talking about, Lars Eller, Matt Nieto, Noel Acciari. They have tough characteristics within their play, but they're not that. And for me, this discussion in general is a lot like politics. At least our modern politics, where everybody's either way over here or way over there. And if you're in the middle, you're just a weirdo. There's nothing there. It should just be completely empty in the middle. The fans who still value some sort of old school toughness, again, doesn't mean dropping the gloves. It could just mean, hey, look, so-and-so took a cheap shot at Sid. Go get him. Doesn't have to be a fight. You just go after him, make sure that he knows that he's not allowed to be doing that, or that if he does do that, there's going to be a reaction. Penguins have none of this. They had none of it this past season, and I don't see it coming in the 2023-24 season either. But there are a lot of people that would like to see at least some semblance of it. One guy, two guys, who in addition to being able to play, can also mix it up as needed. And of course, on the other end of this hockey/neo-political spectrum, you've got the advanced analytics crew that just turn their nose up at absolutely anything that has even the tiniest trace of toughness attached to it. Probably the most glaring example of that I've seen in recent years around here was the acquisition of Erik Goodbranson. If you'll recall, Jim Rutherford sent Tanner Pearson out to Vancouver. Bad contract, not much of a player, didn't have a lot left, did not fit in at all in Pittsburgh for whatever reason. And Goodbranson came from Vancouver, a big, strong, right-handed defenseman who was a first-round pick, I believe 4th overall, unless I'm mistaken, and, had some ability and, for whatever reason, was a good fit and became instantly popular with his teammates and put up even, good advanced metrics. That crowd had no idea what to do with this. This was like man on the moon, man on Mars type of stuff for that crowd, because they're not used to having any of their equations proven wrong. And Goodbranson came here and blew them up pretty good. He didn't necessarily sustain that everywhere he's been since, but he was a fit here in Pittsburgh. And he remains, for me, to this day, the example of, hey, you can have someone who can play and take care of things. There aren't many of them in the league. When you have one, don't just dump all over them because some new ideology instructs you to react a certain way. If anything, if you're into analytics, you should be the most open-minded. You should be the most objective. And in a lot of cases, it's exactly the opposite with that crowd. And yet, I say all of this, and none of it matters, because what it always comes down to is that Mike Sullivan, the head coach, the one who deploys the people on the ice, the one who had Reeves on his roster and opted to not deploy him, wants nothing to do with this. He doesn't believe in retribution, revenge in hockey, in any capacity for any reason. He just doesn't. He sees it as completely counterproductive to the cause. He sees his players' toughness as being best demonstrated through a team commitment to not take penalties. Well, okay, that's fine. And that did work for a couple of Stanley Cup runs. It did. But the problem that's emerged in that capacity is, right, the power play doesn't punish anybody anymore. That's the real killer here. If you're going to continue to stick by a culture of never ever do anything back to anybody because we'll get them on the power play, then you'd better get them on the power play. Because if you don't, all these players with the bruises and welts and everything else are going to wonder what the heck they're doing. And don't think that some of that hasn't already crept into the process. When we come back, J1Q. Today's J1Q comes from Cody. He says, DK, do you think the Penguins have the ability to address the exhale as presently constructed? The exhale is what I call the opening minute of the period, the minute after you score a goal, and the closing minute of a period. It would feel like the team exhales and lets in a stupid goal during those times far too often throughout the season. Is that something that needs to be fixed by the coach, by the GM, or by the players? Well, the answer to your question, Cody, is obviously D, all of the above. And probably even more than that. I have today on our website Drive to the Net analysis breaking down Lars Eller and some of the things that he brings to a team from strictly the intelligence standpoint. I know he's 34. He's not flying around the way he did a handful of years ago. His offensive production is down. I'm aware of the knocks. I'm aware of the perceived overpay of his contract. I happen to not agree with it. I happen to not agree with the general criticism of the Eller contract. And the reason for that is what you're describing there, Cody, was the result of Sullivan looking down at his bench and seeing no adults that he could send out there. And please don't misconstrue that to be a reference to age. He had lots of older people. What he didn't have was a smart, shutdown type, 200-foot third-line center. Someone who not only is assigned the role, but lives the role. That's who Eller is. That's who Eller's always been when he's been at his best, including his young days in Montreal, his Stanley Cup days in Washington. And the Avalanche used him the same way after picking him up mid-season last year. He is that guy. He can make a big, big difference in that regard. He is worth the investment, I feel, because of the fit. Different players are always going to come with different values to different teams. That's one of the things that always gets left out of these random debates about this sort of thing. The Penguins need Eller more than other teams do, so it's logical that the Penguins would pay more. And I'm sorry, they still didn't pay too much. It's 2 years and $4.9 million. Big whoop out of the cap. The overall cap, that's a drop in the bucket. I believe Eller will be a big part of what you're describing. I believe Eller is someone that Sullivan can send out and will send out in those situations. Not all of them, not religiously. But the reason that I say that is, if you remember when Teddy Bluger, pre-broken jaw, was on a line regularly with Brandon Tanev and Zach Aston Reese, that's how he used those guys. That's the way he trusted those guys. He wanted them to be the ones who immediately took charge so that even if the rest of the team felt the need to, how did you put it, exhale, these guys weren't going to do that. It would be wonderful for the Penguins if Eller can have that effect on this team. That said, I really want you to go read this thing. I don't make a habit of pushing this stuff that I've written, but I want you to go take a look at this Drive to the Net feature today and tell me what you think. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everyone listening to Daily Shot of Penguins, and we're going to do another one of these tomorrow.